Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. We could not be more excited to be hosting events during Secret Path Week in partnership with the Gord, Downie, and Chanie Wenjack Fund. So the Downie Wenjack Fund is part of musician Gord Downie's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downie and Wenjack families to call Canadians to action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of this land. So the goal is to continue the conversation that began with Chanie Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. So on Thursday, Friday, we had classrooms joining us from across Canada to help us celebrate Indigenous scientists, artists, and leaders from across the country as we work towards meaningful reconciliation. And over the next 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're really excited to have Jessica Perritt joining us today. She's the Senior Advisor of Indigenous Knowledge at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and has been instrumental in creating their Indigenous Knowledge policy, as well as their upcoming reconciliation policy and liaising with the Council of Elders and Youth. So she's a member of the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and a proud Anishnawbekwe, which means Ojibway woman. So Jessica has brought respect for Indigenous knowledge and worldview to life in the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And her next big project is helping them take further steps on the journey towards reconciliation to make them a true example for the rest of Canada. So Jessica, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We have some classrooms joining us on camera. We have even more tuning in live via YouTube. We're excited to get to know you a little better today.
Good morning. Bonjour, Ani, Epigish Makwa, Dishnakas, Makwa Dodem. My spirit name is End of the Earth Bear Woman, and my totem is bear, and I am really happy to be here today and really proud to be part of the Downie Wenjack Fund, as Gord Downie was really the soundtrack to my youth, so to be part of his legacy is a great honor. Want to welcome all the students we have and teachers and say Chimigwech for coming to learn about my journey and where I'm at now and the exciting work that's happening at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. So my role at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization is to really be the bridge between Western science and Indigenous knowledge. We have many really qualified scientists here at the NWMO, from nuclear scientists to geoscientists, physicists, environmental scientists, all sorts of really technical people. And a big part of our work is ensuring that we interweave Indigenous knowledge into all aspects of our work. And so one thing we've recognized since we've started doing this work is that there is a big knowledge gap between Western science and Indigenous knowledge. As Indigenous people in Canada, we've had to walk between both those worlds throughout our history, and we've had to do that to succeed. So we've had to go to university and get education and be part of that worldview, but also, be tied back to our communities and the teachings that we get from our elders, from our knowledge keepers, and really figure out how do we balance both of those worldviews and how we live our lives. So one thing, though, that Western scientists or Western society hasn't had to do is they haven't had to learn Indigenous way of thinking and Indigenous worldview. And so there's a bit of an imbalance between those understandings. And so my role is to really help, primarily help build that understanding amongst the Western scientists we work with at universities, and also that we work with internally at our organization. So I went to school, I went to university and received a degree in mathematics and physics, and understand that way of thinking very well, and have had the really good opportunity to apply that education to different organizations, primarily in the energy sector throughout my life. And my journey has led me to here, which has really put a spin on that formal education and has really required me to draw upon the knowledge keepers I've learned from throughout my life and help the organization figure out how to really bring Indigenous knowledge to bear on all aspects of our work. So my job is kind of being a bit of a teacher at the organization to ensure that people understand the rich history of Indigenous people here in Canada, and also the hard history. There is a very dark past that Indigenous people have in Canada, and it's important that we understand that history and also understand how that history impacts our communities today. Because oftentimes people think it is history and it's just something that happened in the past and, time to move on and get over it. But it really is important that people tie the past to what's happening in communities today. So a big part of my role is making sure that our staff is receiving that education and developing that understanding so that when we go work in communities, we can do that effectively and with compassion and apply those 7 grandfather teachings of love, trust, respect, honesty, humility, and bravery as we do our work. So, being that bridge is really important, and for staff to be successful in their roles as well. Another big part of my role at the organization is we have a group of Indigenous elders from across Canada that are independent advisors to us. And so I get to learn from them, which has been amazing to both me professionally, but also personally, to learn about my history, as it's amazing that these classrooms are learning about Indigenous way of thinking and Indigenous history in classrooms today. But when I was in school, which isn't that long ago, maybe a bit long ago, but that didn't happen. And so I didn't learn about my own history that is a big part of who Canada is in my school education. So that's something I've also had to learn in my journey is that history, and also how that's helped shaped kind of, how I apply that history into, what I do within my job, but also with regards to being a mother and, also being a daughter to residential school survivors, and being kind of that bridge again too, is how do we break those cycles? So as I said before, there's a bit of a gap between Indigenous knowledge and Western science. And some people don't understand that Indigenous people have their own science. They are scientists in their own nature. They have people that are knowledge keepers in astronomy, that have that are weather tellers, that they can read the weather. They have a lot of knowledge about rocks and the land and the plants and the animals and how those cycles work. A lot of information about physics and mathematics. If we think about building a teepee, there's a lot of physics and mathematics that goes into that to make sure that those structures can stand the test of time and make sure that they are good structures for shelter. So there's a lot of Indigenous science that's out there, and understanding how that knowledge system is so rich with regards to science, but also governance and protocols, and helping our scientists understand those types of things. So it's really bringing those things to bear, and also breaking that understanding that Western science is a way of thinking. It's not the only way of thinking, and that opening people's minds to kind of be open to different ways of thinking, and having then that same level of respect that they have for, the geoscience experts, the chemistry experts, and all of those types of things, engineering, but having that same level of respect for those folks as they do Indigenous knowledge keepers, because they have the same expertise, just from a different lens. So my role is really to be that bridge. And then now, applying what reconciliation means to that. And so we've committed as an organization to commit to reconciliation in all aspects of our work, to change how industry works with Indigenous communities in Canada, to ensure that there is space created for Indigenous voice, and that voice has the same respect that the other voices at the table have. So it's really important that we create those spaces for Indigenous voice in everything we do. So whether that's in the classroom or at the boardroom table or in the school system, at universities, it's really important that that space is there, and that space is occupied by Indigenous people, because they are the experts within their own knowledge system. And it's really important that as we move forward as a country, we recognize that. And that's the only way we're going to change that relationship that Canada has with Indigenous people that have occupied this land for generations. And so I think about that in my role, but also, you know, as I teach my children. And I'm sure you guys celebrated Orange Shirt Day recently on September 30th. And one thing I push my kids to do is, you know, it's important you're wearing your orange shirt, but understand why you're wearing that orange shirt. And are they talking about that in the schools, you know, and pushing my kids to, you know, maybe if they aren't, to initiate that conversation, to start creating that space for voice, because I think that's really vital in how we start to build new relationships and effective relationships that are built on respect and trust and, you know, really making sure that we have those foundations before we start imposing any sort of projects or ideas with communities we're working with. I just have a couple of pictures, and I don't know how to share this. I'm hoping it works.
All right, we can walk you through it. So if you hit that share button, you should get some options, and the PowerPoint should be one of them.
Yes, it is. Okay. So, just a sec. So one thing we've tried to do as an organization is really create opportunities for people to learn together in a safe space. So whether it's us, our geologists going out on the land and learning about the rocks, that they also have Indigenous people learning from them. And then they are also learning from Indigenous knowledge keepers about the rocks. So creating those opportunities has been really key. Maybe it's just elders sitting around a fire and talking about what they know about the land, and you know, maybe they know something about the rocks based on this is where the blueberries grow, but the geoscientists have a different lens, and they have those opportunities to work together. Another big thing within Indigenous knowledge is that ceremony is a big part of our knowledge system. There's also this misconception that Western science is void of any culture, but in fact it actually stems from a very specific culture of Western European culture, and Indigenous knowledge is no different. So it has a lot of culture in that. And the way of thinking is a bit more holistically and more relationship-based than how Western scientists traditionally think, a little bit more linear, like this will happen, and then we do an experiment, and then that'll happen, and then we test that. Whereas Indigenous knowledge is it tests things in a different way. That is, if we affect the water in some way, how is that impact on the water going to relate to the plants, the animals, the air, the people, and that understanding, and having that a bit more of a holistic way of thinking. And also a big part of that knowledge system is ceremony and receiving advice and guidance through ceremony. So this is something we've had to create space for within our organization, and also then be receptive to that advice we're getting through ceremony, which has been a big challenge for us as an organization. But this is just actually a ceremony that we had last week to finalize our reconciliation policy. And then creating different learning opportunities, whether it's training with regards to the history, talking about treaties and people understanding the treaties that First Nation communities have in Canada, and then also how that impacts our work. Making sure staff are celebrating significant days like Orange Shirt Day, and also understanding why they're wearing those own shirts. Opening our significant events with, with an elder speaking at the beginning to the importance of that day and sharing their knowledge on that event, and just sharing other opportunities like documentaries that are happening, books, and stuff like that. And again, just really creating that atmosphere of learning together, being open, and experience things, and just really encourage you as young people to really have open minds, have respect for all different knowledge systems that exist out there, and experience it when you can, because that's really how that's the most effective way of learning, is just putting ourselves in there and learning in that way. So yeah, it just helps us have a better understanding, and I think a more holistic understanding of what's going on out there. I don't know how to close that now. So yeah, that's kind of my journey and what I do, and happy to answer any questions if there are.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for sharing, Jessica. I think it's a very important role, and I think you're right. A lot of times, you know, students might see something like an Orange Shirt Day or a corporation, and they take part in it, but they don't really understand the meaning. So it's important to have advisors and a real presence from the Indigenous community to help guide schools and organizations through important ceremonies like that, important days, important opportunities. All right, so I want to give a shout out to our classrooms who are tuning in via YouTube. Don't forget, on the right, there's the chat sidebar. You can let us know where you're watching from, send us in some questions, and I will keep an eye out for some of those. As well, any classroom, whether you're tuning in via YouTube today or you're with us on Twitter, take some pictures, post them, use the hashtag Secret Path Week. You can also tag @DownieWenjack, because we love to see pictures of classrooms in action and hanging out with us for the events. So let's meet one of our camera classrooms. So we're going to go to Goderich, Ontario. We've got Mrs. Ball's group hanging out with us. Let me get their microphone turned on.
Say hi.
How are we doing this morning, Goderich? All right, awesome. Does anybody have a question for Jessica this morning?
So we were wondering what some of the biggest challenges are that NWMO has faced with respect to Indigenous issues.
One of the biggest challenges is the importance of relationship. So that not only means the importance of relationship that we have with communities. So our project is working with communities to find a long-term storage solution for all of Canada's used nuclear fuel. So in that, we're asking communities to step forward and say they're interested in our project. And one thing that, you know, if a municipality or a community like Goderich raises their hand and say they're interested, that really means that the First Nation communities and Métis communities in the area are also maybe involuntarily also raising their hand, because anywhere in Canada, there will be a traditional territory or First Nation community or Métis community that will be impacted based on their traditional territory and how they traditionally use that land. And so therefore, based on treaties in Canada, they also have a voice in how projects are implemented. So it's really our staff understanding the importance of relationship and going into communities as I guess as a human first before they're experts. So I think oftentimes in the corporate world, people went to school for a long time and worked really hard to get those credentials. And so when you get out in the real world business world, you know, you'll introduce yourself in that way. You know, my name is Jessica Perritt and I have a degree in math and physics. And now because of that, I want you to listen to me, where we've had to break those things down and really get people to connect with you as people first, you know, and understand you're a mother, you're a daughter, you have that human role, which is Indigenous communities are going to connect with better than those credentials behind your name. And also understanding their relationship with Mother Earth. So Indigenous people in Canada have a very strong connection to the land and therefore have a worldview that it's their role to protect and be stewards to Mother Earth. And so they really look at things from that lens point. So to really understand the importance of relationship has been a big learning curve for the organization, but has been well worthwhile, because once once you break down those things and you start to build relationships based on trust and respect.
All right. And I think that's such a good point, Jessica, is I think a lot of times in the past, people would come into communities and almost be telling people what to do instead of listening first and finding out about some of the issues. So I think that's a really important role. And, you know, why close all the doors before we even start? Coming in, opening doors and listening is a really important first step. So I want to give a few shout outs to some YouTube groups who've introduced themselves. We've got Mrs. Duncan's group in Mississauga. Also Mrs. Date's geography class is joining us. So don't forget to send us in some questions. And I've got a question for you from YouTube, Jessica, and they're wondering about issues in the past with nuclear waste management. Was there conflict in the past that kind of led to more of an understanding and for roles like yours to be developed?
So in the past, actually, with regards to nuclear waste management, there was a panel put together called the Seaborne Panel, and it really was to look at how nuclear waste was managed for the long term, but with a really important aspect of involving people, because that project really was, from a technical point of view, let's go out there and site the project. And from a technical point of view, that project was perceived very safe internationally, but people didn't have an understanding of it. So the people, even though maybe it was technically proven safe, if the people didn't understand or perceive that it was safe, then it was still not safe. And so our project really came about from that observation. And then the federal government created what's called the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act, which then mandated all of the nuclear power producers in Canada to develop a plan to safely manage all of Canada's used nuclear fuel for the long term. And it's really based on the polluter pays principle, with the fact that we're generating nuclear energy in Canada, so we should be the generation that's responsible for taking care of it and not putting it on a future generation. So our project is based on a willing, informed host community, which is different than previous decisions in Canada. But it's also internationally, I guess, from a technical point of view, it's international best practice. But from a people aspect of things, it's, you know, that varies throughout Canada. So we're really based on communities raising their hand to say they're interested to learn about our project. And right now we're still in that learning phase, and it won't be for another 5 or 10 years before we ask communities to commit to hosting our project.
All right. We're going to visit another camera classroom. Mr. Taylor's group is hanging out with us this morning. Grade 9 students in Niagara Falls. Let's get their microphone turned on. Morning, Niagara Falls. How's it going? All right. Who's got a question for Jessica?
Isaac, you want to go first? Talk loud, buddy.
All right. What dangers do you have working in a nuclear environment?
Okay. I think I heard that. Was it, what dangers are there working in a nuclear environment?
Yes.
Yep.
So I don't really work in a nuclear environment because our office is really on the back end of it. So there's a huge nuclear industry that goes from the mining of nuclear, or the mining of uranium, which is primarily done in Saskatchewan, to the production of nuclear energy, which is done primarily in Ontario. And those are where the energy is created. And then I work in a Toronto office, so there's not a lot of danger where I'm at. And also work in communities, because we are right now, all of Canada's used nuclear fuel is stored on site where it's created, so it's managed safely there. But there are safety concerns on the site, so people make sure that they have the safety equipment they need, and making sure that they do everything in a safe way. Because safety really is number one, but making sure that they're wearing the equipment they need, they're doing things in a good way to keep themselves safe from any potential radiation that they may be exposed to. But my job is not very, I don't have any sort of hazards like that with my role. I primarily work in an office, and I work in communities actually. So I get to travel across Canada and internationally to present at conferences, but also get to work with Indigenous communities and help them figure out work plans so that they can have Indigenous work plans that are complement the work plans we're doing. So whether it's a work plan with regards to looking at the rock in the area and understanding the geology, they do a similar project and we bridge those two together, or whether it's the environment, different sort of things. But I get to travel quite a bit for my role, which is nice.
All right. So you mentioned, there's precautions and safety gear that are used around these sites, and I imagine they're monitored pretty heavily. Probably
yes,
different things taken and such.
Yeah. So the monitoring at a nuclear facility is you have to get scanned before you go in to see what type of radiation you have going in. There's security like no end. And then you're also scanned every time you leave a different room within the facility. So there's a lot of those facilities do tours. Like that's something that we offer for communities we're working with, is to go and do a tour and see how used nuclear fuel is currently managed, so that they understand that the safety and the security that goes into that right now. And that really is reassuring for the public to get that understanding and to experience firsthand, because they have to as well go through those scans and see that security that goes into it. So it is a big part of the industry for sure.
All right, we're going to jump to YouTube. It's a grade 11 chemistry class hanging out with Mrs. Duncan and Mississauga, and they're wondering, Jessica, if you can talk a little bit more about some of the differences between Indigenous science or knowledge and kind of the more Western mainstream science.
So one of the big differences actually is this teaching of humility. And the reason why I stress that is because within Western way of thinking, humans are a bit more dominant with regards to, we're the ones doing the experiments and solving, making new discoveries and solving things. And we're kind of the dominant, I would say, species in Western science. And a big difference in Indigenous science is that understanding that humans in the grand scale of creation, we're really kind of low on the totem pole, if you will, but we're really, we really rely on air and water, the animals, the plants. We rely on that to survive, but they don't rely on us to survive. So if humans weren't here, the air would still be air, the water would still be flowing, the plants, the animals, they would still be existing without us. And so the foundation of thinking from the core is very different with regards to that mindset. And because of that, you have a very holistic way of thinking. And that role of humility plays into that you are really insignificant in all of that. And so therefore you have to have respect for all of those different things, and anything that you do will have an impact on the air, the water, the land, the plants, the animals, all of that. So it really is, I would say, a fundamental part of Indigenous knowledge, and a big difference between the two.
All right, let's jump back to Mrs. Ball's class in Gord and see if they have a follow-up question. So I'm going to turn that mic on. All right, follow-up question, boys and girls.
Yeah, Keeper's just coming.
All right, I see him.
I was wondering, have you met Gord Downie in person? And if so, how was he? And for you, to you? And
I wish I met Gord Downie in person. I saw him in concert probably about 10 times when I was a teenager and young adult, but I didn't meet him one-on-one, but he had a really big impact on my youth with regards to his music. But then when he decided that his legacy was going to really create that space for Indigenous voice and make sure that Canada as a whole had a better understanding of Indigenous history, really spoke to me, and really, I guess, proud of him for choosing his legacy to be so important for all of us as people living here in this country. but I didn't get to meet him. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, I echo that sentiment absolutely. Jessica, I was lucky enough to see many hip concerts over the years, and to see him dedicate that last part of his life to reconciliation, to getting people to do something, to kind of raising that awareness across Canada it's an absolutely phenomenal legacy, and it's done so much, and it's still having this big impact as the years go on. So absolutely. I'm going to jump back to our YouTube for another question. And this is a question that just came in. And this class is wondering if you've ever had in your role, or maybe heard of somebody else having pushback from Western scientists, or are they often pretty open to listening and talking and understanding?
From Western scientists about Indigenous knowledge, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of pushback. So I think my role has definitely evolved within the organization, and it is actually a really rare role to have within corporate Canada. There's not a lot of organizations that really have, there's a difference between, I guess, building good Indigenous relationships and engagement and having that dialogue, than actually creating space for Indigenous knowledge within corporate Canada. So there's a bit of a difference between the two. There's a lot of organizations that are understanding the importance of making sure that they have good dialogue and good engagement, and building good relationships with Indigenous communities. With regards to respecting Indigenous knowledge as its own knowledge system has really grown throughout the organization. And I would say when I started, it was a nice idea at the time to say we're going to do this work, but really has taken a lot to get us where we're at today. And it really is just bridging those knowledge systems, because they, you know, and it's to no fault of anybody's, it's just they haven't been exposed to Indigenous knowledge and the rich knowledge system that it is, and how, you know, now we see it makes our project a better project by looking at things from a dual lens, and applying that knowledge from a dual lens and making decisions based on both of those knowledge systems. Because some people will apply Indigenous knowledge, let's say in an environmental assessment, which is required by federal legislation, but how they're applying it to how decisions are being made is a little, I think, is where we need to grow within Canada and within corporate Canada especially. So there, I would say yes, generally there's been pushback, and I still think we have room to grow before there's not pushback.
Yeah, well, it's very, I mean, it's exciting. Your role sounds like it's a very unique role, and that you're kind of paving the way, you're pioneering the way for other corporations to be able to do something like this.
Yes, definitely. And we really see ourselves as leaders. And unfortunately, when you're a leader, you got to try things and learn from them. And I think that's really important, that we want to be leaders. We are doing great work, but we're still learning as we go. And it's really important that we reflect on the work that we're doing and take time to reflect and see, you know, what went well, what wouldn't go well, how do we do things better, and have those conversations with Indigenous knowledge keepers, not just us having those conversations with ourselves. It's really important that we're having those conversations together, because otherwise then we're just repeating history and deciding what we think is best for our Indigenous communities. We really have to make sure that we're working in partnership and making decisions together. It's not just us making decisions for communities, that they're making decisions for what's best for them, and applying their knowledge system in a way that's good for them is vital.
All right, let's jump back to Niagara Falls, see if Mr. Taylor's class has another question for us.
Got a few. We're gonna go with Noah right now.
Okay, so
Speak up, bud.
how did you decide on your career and area of study?
Well, I decided on my area of study because I was just really good at math and physics. And actually, to be honest, I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grow up. And so I went to university. I went into science because I excelled in that. And when I got out of school, I had many different jobs. And I didn't really decide on ever being the role I'm in. It was just really seizing opportunities that came my way and being open to different opportunities and getting the experience I could. Because the first job I had was in a environmental testing laboratory. So I did environmental testing on soil and water samples, primarily within the oil and gas industry, to make sure that they were meeting the regulations they needed to in order to do projects they were working on. But in that company, they had really high turnover. So people were moving really quick. So I had the opportunity to get a lot of really good experience in different roles there because the turnover was really good. But now looking back, it really gave me a lot of different opportunities and a lot of really good experience. So my advice is just to really be open to different opportunities that come your way, and don't think that you're better than what an opportunity that comes your way. Is to really get the experience, get what you can out of it, and then apply that to your next role. And so I don't think I ever really would have imagined being in the role I'm at. It really was just an evolution of me seizing opportunities and being open to different experiences and putting myself out there a bit and being a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to do that. But that's really how I grew into what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the coolest things about science is there's no right or wrong way. Everybody has a different path, and you might start off in one area and just be totally surprised by where you end up. But that's kind of the exciting thing about science. Let's see. I want to grab one more question from YouTube. That a few years ago, there was water quality issues in Indigenous communities due to uranium mining. Do you know if there's been any improvement in that area?
Well, there's poor water quality in a lot of Indigenous communities in Canada, poor drinking water quality, and I hope that changes, more faster than it is, but that's a different issue. With regards to poor water quality, with regards to uranium mining, I'm not sure what that is referring to specifically, but it could be, I think an important thing to understand is that there's a lot of legacy issues that exist between Indigenous communities in Canada and corporate Canada and also the government. And it's really important to understand those legacies that have been passed down in those communities. So when you go into work in First Nation or Métis communities, there's mistrust to start with because of those poor relationships in the past where industry was just going and doing the work they wanted to do without working with or consulting with Indigenous communities. And so you have to really, that's why I think a relationship is so important, and building relationships built on trust is really key. So I'm not sure about that specific example, but there are many instances throughout Canada, and every community you go to that there's going to be some legacy with regards to whether it's mining, forestry, oil and gas, there's going to be some legacy issues that exist there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Jessica, first of all, a huge thank you for taking some time to hang out with us today, to share your story, to share the great work you're doing at NWMO. Obviously, a shout out to NWMO for realizing this is important conversations that need to be had and making a role like this and being cognizant of it. And of course, a shout out to our classrooms, both on YouTube and who join us live on camera. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. We have a busy Secret Path schedule today. We've got events back to back to back at 12, 1, and 2. So check those out on the Exploring by Seat Your Pants website and join on YouTube for those. And again, Jessica, thank you so much for the work you're doing and sharing it with our classrooms today.
Thank you. And in my language in Anishnawbekwe, we see Chimigwech, which means a big thank you. So
all right.
Ready.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Taylor's class had to duck out for a period change. From Mrs. Ball's class, I'm going to turn your mic on if you guys want to say a big thank you, and then we'll sign off for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Again, Jessica, thanks so much for spending some time with us, and we will see you guys throughout the day for more Secret Path Week events. Thanks, everyone.
So much, Joe.